visit all of the pages of the web. We actually render each page in a real web browser so that our AI can see the page just like a human does, can see the actual pixels, the look of the page. So it's more than just the text of the page.
Mike Tung, thank you for being on my show. How are you all the way from Silicon Valley?
I'm doing well. Thanks a lot for having me.
I'm very excited to chat with you about AI, about your entrepreneurial journey, what you're doing at Diffbot. But we have to go back to being a child musician, playing at Carnegie Hall. What is that about? How do you get to play at Carnegie Hall as a child?
Well, I think my story is similar to a lot of Chinese Americans. They're sort of forced to play an instrument at a young age by their family. But I think the main purpose of that is just to learn discipline and learn practice. So yeah, as a child, I played the violin for maybe, I don't know, about 18 years or so before college, and ended up playing with the group at Carnegie Hall.
That's remarkable. So you grew up in Taiwan, right? You're an immigrant from Taiwan. Tell me a little bit about your background and moving along with that background through Carnegie Hall to get to doing AI at Stanford for your master's.
Wow, it's a lot to compress and a lot of years to compress. But basically, I was born in Taiwan. I immigrated to the U.S. when I was about 2 years old. So don't remember too much about Taiwan from back then. But my parents, my dad came to the U.S. as a grad student, studying biochemistry, and he later on taught at universities as a professor in pathology, and later spun and founded his own biotech company. That he's developing actually vaccines for HIV and even one for COVID right now over in Atlanta, Georgia.
Wow.
And so I grew up in a very entrepreneurial family.
Growing up in a very entrepreneurial family, what does that mean? You immigrated from Taiwan. You were telling me about what your father was doing, but what does it mean being in an entrepreneurial family?
Well, it just means, I guess, it was something accepted, or at least not crazy to be an entrepreneur, since it ran in the family, I guess. However, while the rest of my family is sort of like in biotech and in biology, and I worked at my dad's lab actually growing up, and I realized that I wasn't cut out sort of to do biology. I spent many hours waiting for centrifuges to run, extracting DNA and building viruses, and watching various kinds of clear fluids develop, and I needed a faster iteration cycle than that, waiting days and days for an experiment to run and not knowing where you messed up, maybe like in day 2. And that's kind of how I came to computer science.
So you're looking from this agile approach where you get to see results fast, iterate, pivot, iterate, and get to deeper results, and you find your way towards Stanford Masters in AI, working in the AI lab. Talk to me a little bit about what you're doing there and what draws you specifically to artificial intelligence then.
Well, I mean, so it just started out playing with computers, developing video games, I think like a lot of the typical story of a lot of computer programmers. And after high school, actually, I instead of going directly to college, I worked for about a year at Microsoft as a software engineer, because I thought growing up, Microsoft is the place where they really invented software development.
Right.
And I read about Bill Gates' story, and then so I went there. I got to meet him. Like all the interns are invited to his house, like over the summer.
Wow.
I think back then, so I got to go to his backyard and check out his place. And I learned a ton when I was at Microsoft. So but I also realized I probably don't want to work in a big company for the rest of my life. So after
what
Microsoft,
made you realize that? Why? What was it about the big company, that culture, that you said, okay, maybe I'm more into the small company space?
Well, first, I thought it was a great experience actually working at Microsoft. I learned incredible deal about how like professional software development is done. But I realized I want to do something of my own. I want to I my bosses and mentors when I was working at Microsoft, I had to really think, do I really want to be like that in 20 years or 30 years, right? Kind of doing that kind of work, and I
Right.
just wanted to do more. And I wanted to work in a place that I was not constrained by the organization, where I was sort of like,
Mm,
I think that's why a lot of people do entrepreneurship, because
right.
they can't really work for anybody else.
So throughout these experiences, you are getting into more into artificial intelligence. What do you actually do at Stanford? What is your master's in, and what leads you then towards this idea for Diffbot?
Yeah, so I was interested in AI, I guess way before it was popular, from a pretty young age. Like when I was even in high school, I was like developing neural networks to trade stocks and stuff from
Wow.
reading like sentiment on the very nascent internet at that point in time. So I had always been fascinated by AI and building intelligent systems. At Berkeley, I finished an undergrad in ECS in about 2 years, and then quickly moved to grad school at Stanford, and I took a heavy concentration in AI and AI courses. And so it was at around that time when there was this data set that was being built at Stanford called ImageNet, which was basically like a large
Of
collection of
course.
labeled images of they basically used Amazon Mechanical Turk to label all these images that were
Right.
from Google image search. And I was thinking, okay, how can we build like an image net for language? Because unlike vision, right, like the human language, what we're using right now is what distinguishes humans from animals, right? Like even my dog has computer vision. He can tell the difference between his bowl and a toy, and
Right.
a grassy field, but animals don't have anything like human language, right? So I was thinking about this problem, and why is there no like ImageNet for language? Even today, there isn't really something like that. And it's because there's way more concepts that humans have created than there are, like 1,000 image classes. And it would take,
Right.
up to 50 man decades in order to build such a data set, right? So that's when I
Wow.
started thinking, okay, what if we could use AI to automatically construct actually a structured data set of all the concepts that human beings care about? Um, and what greater resource is there than the internet itself? And that, the internet I view as basically kind of like the world's largest man-made sensor. Anything that's an important entity, someone's created a page for on the internet, right? And the only problem with the internet is that it's not in a structured format that's needed for machine learning and AI to use. So
Mm.
I started thinking back then about how can we actually convert the internet into actually like a structured data set that then applications can use.
Wow, fascinating. So you're starting. So that's the research that you're going towards, and I'm also aware that you've given quite a few guest lectures at Stanford about knowledge graphs and about the different work that you've done in this field. So take me through this entrepreneurial journey. How do you take a research question that you're so excited about and translate that into a company that you're running along with the work that you're doing at Stanford?
Well, I wouldn't say it was a very direct journey. So I don't think you just start on such a task like that directly. During Stanford, I was doing this research and sort of, I guess, trying to delay from writing a thesis because it's very hard to come up with like a breakthrough machine learning algorithm. And so I was doing a lot of side things. Like I was actually working as a patent attorney. I'd taken the patent bar and helping a friend write patents
Wow.
to basically make money on the side as a side hustle. Um, I actually ended up working for a startup that one of my professors at Stanford, Professor Prabhakar Raghavan, who's now a very important person at Google, um, he um, he said I was taking his information retrieval class, and then he pulled me aside after basically the end of the class and said, "Hey, I'm doing this startup that I'm an advisor of, and would you join it?" So I joined it as one of the sort of the founding engineers,
Of course, that's what happens
and
at
got a lot of
Stanford.
yeah. It's a very common story at Stanford. That startup years later gets acquired by Facebook. I also had sort of did a project with some buddies called Click.tv that was like a video search engine that then we later sold to Cisco. Um,
Right.
so I had a couple of acquisitions under my belt, and I had worked as a consulting scientist at Yahoo on their search and on eBay on their search. So the trend here is I got a lot of experience in building a search engine, like from scratch. And these connections sort of paid off later. Like eBay became one of the first customers of Diffbot. There's actually a group in eBay in Israel called the Structured Data Group that uses Diffbot.
I'm good friends with that group. I worked with eBay closely on some projects that I did in my transition between high school and the army, and it's a really fantastic team.
Yeah, well, they were a user of Diffbot, and then some of those engineers there, basically Diffbot replaced their work, and then later we hired them to join Diffbot from one of the guys from eBay Israel.
Fantastic. So what is Diffbot? And I'd love to spend some time hearing another amazing founder story. So taking through your inner, the personal journey that you're from deciding to run the company. What are some of the biggest hurdles that you're going through? Along, what are some of the most enjoyable moments of creating this company?
Okay, so the first question, what is Diffbot? So basically, Diffbot is a search engine. Now, how it differs from Google, how it's the same as Google is that we crawl the web, right? So we visit all of the pages of the web. We actually render each page in a real web browser so that our AI can see the page just like a human does, can see the actual pixels, the look of the page. So it's more than just the text of the page. And then what we do is how the AI comes into play is on every page on the web, we're able to classify that page into what type of page is it? Is this a person page? Is it an organization page? Is it a product page? Is it an image page? And we're able to automatically convert this into structured information, right? So like a structured record about a person, place, or thing. And then what we build is what we call the knowledge graph, which is essentially, a structured database, right? So how it differs when you use Google, for example, what Google is you type in a query and then Google gives you back a sorted list of results, right? So Google is similar to a card catalog in a library where it's directing you to other pages to read, right? And then Google's business model is to auction off basically your attention to the highest bidder and advertisers. There's a trade-off, I guess, between relevance and advertising, right? And then, but Google doesn't actually contain the knowledge. It's actually just routing you to web pages, which you read, and then you gain knowledge from reading those results, right? Diffbot is actually doing the reading of those web pages, using our AI, assembling it into this structured data set, and then returning back those facts directly from our index. And so the reason Diffbot is useful, especially for people building applications and businesses, is if you're building an app, let's say, you cannot just directly access a search engine. You need structured data to show in your app and to use it in your app, right? So for example, like Snapchat is one of the customers of Diffbot. We power like the stories feature, those articles, news stories inside Snapchat. We also power other search engines like DuckDuckGo when you see like those news tiles or organization tiles. If you are like a business that has like a CRM, we can actually take every record in your CRM and automatically enrich and enhance it using the information we have in the knowledge graph. So think of it almost like like a professional search engine that a business application can use, right? All of your other business tools that you use are not generally like ad supported software. That's like consumer software, right? Like your Microsoft Word or Zoom doesn't have like a pop-up ad inside it. And that's how it's like supported.
How do you get to the realization that this is even something that's needed? So if I were to even as I am studying artificial intelligence at Stanford and I'm working on a lot of these questions, I would never imagine like maybe I should build a competitive search engine that could create structured data out of the World Wide Web.
Well, so you study AI, so there's basically like three drivers, right, of improving AI performance. There's the hardware, the software, and then the data, right? So I realized early on that the hardware, I can never really compete there. I'm not going to compete against Intel or TSMC or Samsung and come up with better hardware, right? NVIDIA, there's already billions of dollars invested in that area, making that better. The software, well, I was trying to compete in that in grad school, developing new algorithms, right? But then there's like Google TensorFlow, there's PyTorch, there's all this. The software is always getting better, and there's so many people coming up with better algorithms all the time as well, right? But when you start to think about data and you want to build an intelligent system, you need structured data. well, what does everyone do? They end up just collecting their own data. They end up just kind of rolling their own for their own application, using the data they have. There isn't really like a kind of a knowledge store where you can just kind of say,
Right.
I want to import this data from this source, and I have a core set of people, organizations, or articles or information to start out with that I can tap
Right.
into. And so that's an area where I saw there is actually a gap. And looking at things like ImageNet, you can see that it was actually this data set that resulted in this new revolution in deep learning. It wasn't actually any novel new algorithm, right, that was invented.
Mm.
Because neural networks have been around, since at least the 60s and 70s.
Right.
So it's what I realized, hey, why can't we build like an everything store of data and structure the world's knowledge and build like a new kind of search engine for that
Sure.
these intelligent applications can use.
Right. So share with me, let's say a use case that I'm building an application that has something to do with sports, right? And let's say that I'm dealing a lot with the FIFA soccer tournament or with the NFL, and I want to
Yeah.
make use of this knowledge database that you're accumulating by taking the World Wide Web and making it into structured data. How would that use case look like from your perspective? If I were to want to use Diffbot, for example.
Yeah. So I can show you an example. I'm not sure if
Amazing.
uh, so with sports, one of our customers is called Sports Innovation Lab, and what they do is basically they produce business intelligence for owners of like sports teams and sports executives, right?
Okay.
So they're using the Diffbot knowledge graph in order to track like what's developing all these events in the sports world,
Sure.
the players, the teams. They're using it to track like which teams have like COVID, which things are shutting down, how are things like reopening. So it's helping sports executives re-navigate sort of the reopening, like post-COVID. And so they're using the knowledge graph to keep track of all these things, right? Because it seems like things are changing in the news on a daily basis with each team and each player. It's too much for like a human to keep track of, right? So
Amazing.
our
So what
AI is
I'd love
actually,
it.
because we crawl the web, keeping track of all that
What I'd love
and
is
presenting
that
that in a
as you're
BI
explaining
dashboard
this,
for them.
we're gonna put a box right above your head of how it's gonna look. So how does a company like that interact with Diffbot on their day to day as they're on both on the application level, but also on the consumer level?
Yeah, I shared with you a link to basically how it looks like to the end user, but you can see basically um, there's this dashboard that shows a visualization across time of various sporting world related events, as they relate to
Wonderful.
COVID and sports. And so you can see it's sort of curated by the team. On each team, it shows like, when that league was postponed, when it reopens, like athlete data, like whether a player has COVID.
Wow, that's very
So
very
yeah,
cool. That's very very
um,
cool. What was the most surprising part of the startup journey for you until now?
well, I mean, startup journey has so many surprises in it. I guess with Diffbot, I'm surprised by different use cases of
Right.
our technology at all the time. Right, every day you hear about one of our customers using it in a way that you didn't expect the technology to be used in. So I think that's one cool thing about building like a platforms kind of company is that um, the people are free to use it in like lots of different ways that you wouldn't have imagined, and so it creates more innovation.
100%. It also requires some open-mindedness and some creativity on your end to accept it and to roll along with it, understanding that that you're seeing these radically new use cases that you didn't expect, but you're embracing them, and now you're able to understand the magnitude of what you're building. Mike, this was really wonderful, and I love what you're doing. I know that you're also hiring, so I'm guessing that if anybody here is into this kind of stuff and would like to reach out, I can make the intro. That's okay with you?
Yeah, definitely.
Wonderful.
We're probably the best place in the world if you care about building automatic knowledge graphs using AI, right, from the whole web. besides Google and Bing, we're the only other US entity that crawls the entire internet. So we have our own facility here in the Bay Area that crawls the web and has a copy of it.
Unbelievable. How many people are you in the company right now?
We're a little less than 40 people right now.
Wow. That's very, very impressive. It's mind-boggling to me. A team of less than 40 people making sense of the entire internet, crawling the entire internet. That's just it was unbelievable when Larry and Sergey attempted to do it in 1998 when the internet was this small. It's even more impressive when you're trying to do it when the internet is this big. Mike, before we leave, I have to ask you for 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
This is a tough question to reduce like a human just to like 3 bits, but I would say if I were to only choose 3 words in my entry in the Diffbot knowledge graph, it would probably be machine learning engineer, because that probably most describes what I do, like engineering machine learning systems, and that describes the core of what I do as a CEO.
I love that. Mike, thank you very, very much. This was really great. I learned a lot. Thank you for being so generous with your time, and best of luck, and stay safe and stay healthy.
Great. Thanks for having me, Michael.